Okay, so let's jump right in. When I say the word architect, what's the first image that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably someone sketching out a skyscraper, a master of buildings. But what if I told you that the ancient Greeks, the very people who gave us masterpieces like the Parthenon, had a totally different blueprint for what an architect really is?
To even begin to understand their idea, we have to start right here, with this kind of cryptic clue from the philosopher Aristotle. The key, the secret ingredient in all of this, is that Greek word you see there, archaea, which means beginning. Keep that word in mind because it is going to completely change the way you think about architects. But before we get there, we have to talk about the idea we all have in our heads, what I'm going to call the master builder myth. This is our modern default image of those brilliant ancient Greeks who built some of the most famous structures in all of human history.
We're talking about the rock stars of the ancient world, right? Guys like Ictinus and Callicrates, the geniuses who designed the Parthenon. They are and should be celebrated for their incredible command of design, their perfect sense of proportion, their raw technical skill. They were, without a doubt, absolute legends of building.
So this is the definition that we're all familiar with. An architect is a master builder, the person who knows exactly how to put stone on top of stone to create something truly magnificent. And honestly, for a long time, that's where the story pretty much ended. But it turns out that's not where it began.
So now let's look at the original Greek concept. Because this whole master builder idea, it's actually a pretty modern invention. The ancient Greeks, the people who actually came up with the word, had something way bigger, way more profound in mind. And this is where things get really interesting. To get to the bottom of this, we have to ask a question that sounds kind of crazy at first. Did the Greeks, the people who basically perfected columns and temples, even have a word for architecture? And the answer, believe it or not, is no, they didn't. The word we use, architectura, is actually Latin. It came from the Romans, much, much later. So, wait a minute. If the Greeks didn't have a word for the thing these people did, then what in the world did their word for the person, the architecton, actually mean to them? Well, to find that answer, we can't look at ancient building plans. Nope, we have to look at the writings of their great philosophers. And we're going to start with Plato. You see, he used the idea of an architect not to talk about buildings, but to talk about something much bigger, leadership and society itself. And boom! There it is. This quote is a total game changer. For Plato, the architecton isn't the person getting their hands dirty. Their job is to provide cognition. We're talking knowledge, thought, strategy, direction. The architect is a leader of the workers, not just another worker. Their real job happens in the mind. Plato makes this brilliant distinction to drive the point home. See, a spectator can just sit back and judge from afar. Easy, right? But an architect or a statesman has to be in the game. They have to actually enact their judgments by leading a whole team, by turning a thought into a real collaborative action. They're not just watching the play, they're directing it. He even uses this beautiful analogy of weaving. Think about it. A weaver takes different, sometimes opposing threads, and brings them together to make a strong fabric. Plato said that's what a true leader does. They don't just work with one type of person. They have to weave together the courageous and the cautious, the swift and the slow, to create a balanced and harmonious society. So Plato really laid down the intellectual foundation here. But then his student Aristotle comes along and takes this idea of the architect as a master thinker and just expands it into this grand, sweeping philosophical vision. Aristotle came up with this sort of hierarchy of knowledge. You can think of it like a ladder. At the very bottom, you've got just basic sense perception. A step up, you have experience. You know that something works, but you don't know why. Higher still is art and science. Now you understand why it works. And at the very top, that's wisdom, the knowledge of first causes. So the big question is, where on this ladder does the architect sit? You guessed it, right at the very top. Aristotle is crystal clear about this. Architects are wiser than the skilled craftspeople, not because their hands are better, but because their minds grasp the causes, the deep fundamental principles behind everything that's being done. They don't just know the what, they know the why. And that brings us right back to that word from the very beginning, archi, or, in its plural form, archai. For Aristotle, the archai are the first principles, the absolute foundational beginnings of things. This is the architect's true playground, not wood and stone, but the very principles that give wood and stone their meaning and purpose.
But then Aristotle goes even further, and this is kind of mind-blowing. He says that the architectonic arts, the arts of the architect, aren't just based on these principles. He says they are the principles. They are the source code, the directing force that guides all the other arts.
So, of course, this leads to the ultimate question, right? If there's this master art that directs all the others, what is the most important, the most architectonic art of them all? What's the master art that guides an entire society toward its highest possible goal? And his answer is politics. Now, hold on. He doesn't mean politics like campaigns and elections. For the Greeks, politics was the art of ordering a city, a polis, in such a way that all of its citizens could truly flourish and achieve the common good. It's the art of building a good society. And this is what the true architect becomes in Aristotle's grand vision. They become the architect of the end. Not the end of a construction project, but the ultimate end goal, the whole purpose, the telos of an entire community.
Aristotle's analogy for this is just perfect. He says to imagine a city full of archers. They can all shoot an arrow, sure, but if they don't have a target to aim at, they're just firing randomly. The architect of the end, the true political philosopher, is the one who provides that target. They provide the vision of the common good, what he called eudaimonia, so that everyone in society can aim their efforts in the same productive direction.
Okay, let's tie all of this together. We started with master builders working with stone, and we ended up with master thinkers designing societies. We now have all the pieces to finally understand the original Greek blueprint for what an architect truly is. And here it is, the big aha moment. Let's break down the word architecton. It's made of two parts. First, arche, which we now know means beginnings or first principles. And second, tekton, which means a maker or a builder. So the original architect wasn't a master builder. They were a leader of beginnings, a maker of principles. And that is such a profound change in perspective, isn't it? The Greeks gave us this incredible idea of an architect not as someone who just designs physical buildings, but as a visionary leader who understands the foundational principles you need to build a just, a flourishing, and a good society. They're the ones who build the very blueprint for how we all live together. Which really leaves us with one last big thought. The project of building a good society, of being an architect of the good, is never really finished. As the scholar Christopher Long says, it's something that every single generation has to take up for itself. So it kind of challenges us to ask, who are the architects of our society today? And maybe, even more importantly, how are you participating in designing our shared future?